Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack some incredibly profound and honestly pretty challenging questions. Like, have you ever stopped to wonder what the true meaning of equality actually is? Or why, no matter how hard we try, we so often end up feeling undervalued, dismissed, or just flat out disrespected by society? Well, today we're exploring a very specific alternative philosophical framework drawn straight from our source material that tries to answer exactly that. It's a perspective that's going to require us to completely rethink how we view our own personal responsibility.
So this explainer is titled The Paradigm of Inner Quality, Rethinking Equality and Respect. The source text we're analyzing today offers this deep, uncompromising look at societal evolution, gender roles, and this really intense concept of extreme personal accountability. And look, whether you find the ideas we're covering today challenging, maybe a bit controversial, or totally enlightening, my goal here is just to break down the architecture of this philosophy so we can clearly understand the argument it's making. We're going to look really closely at how the speaker redefines what it means to be truly equal and how they believe our internal state literally dictates how the outside world treats us.
All right, moving into Section 1, the changing societal landscape.
To really wrap our heads around this philosophy, we first have to look at the historical context the speaker sets up for us. According to the text, society has evolved through some very distinct phases. Back in the post-World War II era, the focus was entirely on rebuilding, right? The source argues that men historically took on the role of building the economic and physical hardware of society, gathering resources, constructing the infrastructure. But during that exact same period, women were largely in the home. However, the text emphasizes they weren't just idle. They were in this era of information. They were absorbing massive amounts of knowledge through early media, like magazines, just taking in the data of the world while that physical foundation was being laid outside. And now, the speaker asserts we've entered the era of true equality, a time that absolutely demands that all this accumulated wisdom actually be applied collaboratively out in the real world.
Which brings us to Section 2, the operating system metaphor.
To explain how these historical roles interact today, the source uses this really fascinating technological analogy. The speaker neutrally frames men as the hardware. They're described as providing the broad physical force, doing the heavy lifting to build the economic and structural foundation. Women, on the flip side, are described as the operating system. In this philosophy, feminine energy is considered highly refined, detailed, and intellectual. The core argument here is that you can build the absolute greatest computer hardware in the world, but without a sophisticated operating system, the wisdom to actually run it, well, that hardware is basically useless. The text argues that women are meant to be this guiding software.
However, the source identifies a pretty major modern conflict here. Because women historically gathered and absorbed all this information from within the home, taking in the data while the men were out building the foundation, they developed immense potential. But as the speaker argues, as women are now stepping out into the broader society, many are really struggling to actively apply this inner wisdom. They're entering a world built by hardware, but because they haven't been trained to deploy their software effectively in this specific environment, the result is friction, confusion, and a real sense of being lost in such a complex society.
Okay, let's move to Section 3, defining true gender equality.
So how does this specific framework actually address the modern push for equal rights? Well, the speaker offers a very precise definition. They state, equality means you also have the preparation to come out to society and work, just as I do. The absolutely crucial point here is that in this philosophy, equality is not about just demanding a title or a position simply for the sake of balance. It is entirely about inner readiness. It's about having cultivated the intellectual and spiritual capability to contribute at a truly equal level.
Now, this definition informs a highly debated aspect of the source text, the idea that true equality does not mean performing identical physical tasks. The speaker uses the military as an example, arguing that it's actually misguided to demand equality by insisting women perform the exact same physical combat roles as men. Because natural physical strengths and energy mechanics differ, forcing identical physical roles is seen as highly inefficient. True equality, according to this perspective, is when both the masculine hardware and the feminine software are operating at absolute peak capacity in their respective complementary domains.
Let's transition into Section 4, the root of disrespect.
So if we are meant to be functioning so harmoniously, why do so many people feel marginalized or disrespected? The answer, according to the text, lies in a core philosophical concept, quality, or jilyanang in Korean. Now, we're not talking about the quality of a product here. We're talking about human quality. It's your inner mass. It's your intellectual and spiritual preparation. And ultimately, it's the level of true value that you are capable of providing to society.
The speaker establishes this incredibly direct, uncompromising correlation. Low inner quality results in low external respect. The philosophy basically states that society is a perfectly balanced mirror. If you're doing low-level work, or if you just haven't prepared yourself intellectually to offer high value, you are naturally going to receive low-level treatment. The text argues that society doesn't just randomly disrespect people. No, it responds directly to the quality of the individual.
To make this super concrete, the speaker uses an anecdote about taking a taxi. Imagine you get into a cab, and the driver is just incredibly rude to you. The standard reaction, right, is to get angry and complain about the driver's bad manners. But this philosophy demands extreme personal responsibility. The text says, do not complain. Instead, you have to recognize that your own lack of quality, your lack of economic or social preparation, is the very reason you're in a position where you have to rely on a public taxi in the first place, rather than driving your own car or having a private driver. You're meant to use that sting of disrespect as pure, sheer motivation to improve your own capabilities.
This brings us to Section 5, the police station lesson. Here we have an even more intense example. Let's walk through the step-by-step progression laid out in the text. Imagine you find yourself at a police station, and an officer is scolding you or treating you really harshly. Step 1 is simply facing that negative situation. Step 2, though, is the paradigm shift. You must recognize that your own life choices, your own missteps or lack of awareness placed you in that police station. The officer is literally just playing their role in that environment. Step 3 is radical. Accept the harsh treatment silently. Do not argue back. The text insists you absolutely must view this scolding as a study opportunity to examine your own flaws. And finally, Step 4, grow internally. Raise your quality so you never create the circumstances to be treated that way ever again.
And that brings us to the central warning of the source text. Complaining guarantees history will repeat itself. The speaker asserts that nature, or the universe, brings you these difficult encounters strictly for your own education. If you point the finger at the rude taxi driver or the harsh police officer, if you complain instead of actually absorbing the lesson, nature is going to ensure you are placed in the exact same frustrating situation over and over again until you finally look inward.
Let's look at the ultimate takeaway in Section 6, raising your inner quality.
So how do we actually break this cycle? Well, the solution offered by the text is stark and simple. Stop pointing fingers. The very moment you feel disrespected, marginalized, or undervalued by society, you must immediately stop blaming the external world. The source tells us that feeling slighted is merely a symptom of our own arrested development. The only true path forward, the only way to genuinely gain the respect and equality you desire, is to look entirely inward and obsessively focus on growing your own intellectual and spiritual capability. You have to upgrade your own quality.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought drawn directly from today's deep dive. When faced with disrespect or hardship, are you going to complain about how the world treats you, or will you focus on upgrading your own operating system? This philosophical framework really challenges us to strip away all those external excuses and take 100% responsibility for the energy and quality we bring into the world. It's a highly demanding perspective for sure, but it's one that absolutely forces us to take a hard look in the mirror.